What's up, guys? It's Joshua Bardwell here. And ever since this whole coronavirus pandemic thing started, you guys are all at home working on your quadcopters. And I say that because the number of messages I'm getting from you has easily doubled, maybe tripled. Like right now, I have 35 messages in my inbox. And I last checked that since like late afternoon. So as long as I'm spending even more time every day answering messages, I'm going to make content out of it because normally I'd be making some other content with this time, but instead I'm answering messages. Let's answer some messages. Richard Kobirecki asks, love what you do. It helps so many people. Have been into FPV for a few years now, but I'm having trouble connecting to Betaflight. I just tried hooking a quad to Betaflight. It's making the connection sound, but no port or comm shows up. I even tried using Impulse RC Driver Fixer, but it says port does not exist. Okay, so if Impulse RC Driver Fixer is not used for connecting to Betaflight, it's only used when you are flashing Betaflight and you have tried to put the flight controller into DFU or bootloader mode. If you're just trying to connect, Impulse RC Driver Fixer is the solution to a different problem. You hear the boop sound when you plug in USB. That probably confirms that your USB cable is okay, but you see COM9, but you are not able to connect to it. I'm going to guess that something is wrong with your flight controller. Hi, Rich. If you hear the plug-in USB sound and you see COM9 appear, that confirms to us that your USB cable and your drivers are okay. Since you can't connect to Betaflight after that, maybe something about the flight controller configuration is messed up. The fix is to reflash the flight controller using DFU or bootloader mode. And here are the steps to do that. Make sure you select the correct target from the pull-down menu before you flash. If you don't know what your target is, tell me what flight controller you have, and I will try to advise you. This is a question from Lawrence Martin, who wants to know, I'm thinking of buying the DJI goggles and the air unit, but I'm not sure what controller to use. Do I have to buy and use the DJI controller to use with the GepRC rocket plus the newbie drone, I don't know what, the Vivid? Lawrence. Lawrence, if you buy a quadcopter with the DJI Air unit in it or the Vista, like the GepRC rocket, then you do not have to use the DJI controller. But if you want to use a different controller, you will need to install a different receiver. So, or you can, like some of these, you can buy with a different receiver pre-installed. So if you intend to fly mostly or exclusively DJI drones, then using the DJI controller is way simpler to set up and just very easy to use. No additional hardware, no nothing. But if you intend to fly some drones that don't have DJI in them, that like tiny whoops with analog, or even just you have some quads where you just didn't decide to get a DJI because maybe it was too expensive, then you're going to need two transmitters, because the DJI drones can't, the non-DJI drones cannot be flown with the DJI transmitter. So I think if you plan to exclusively fly DJI drones, then get the DJI controller. If you plan to fly a mix of things, personally, I don't want to have to buy two controllers. I would rather put a receiver in all my DJI drones than have to have a second controller for my non-DJI drones. Does that make sense? The other question that Lawrence asks is, does the TBS Tango 2 controller and Crossfire work with these drones and the goggles? Yes. You can put Crossfire in any drone that you want. You put a Crossfire receiver in the drone, you use the Crossfire module, and you can use the Tango 2 controller or any other controller that supports Crossfire. That has nothing to do with the goggles, though. It doesn't interact with the goggles at all. If you put Crossfire in the quad, Crossfire is the control link. The DJI will be the video link, and they obviously work together, but they don't work together. They're not integrated. Emmerich Delavive asks, I have a TBS Oblivion. I've done the update on the Power Cube and the Crossfire Micro V2. When I want to start with aux1, the motor runs for 3 seconds and I've got an alarm. Reconnected Betaflight and I have this alarm. MSP connection is active. Emmerich, the MSP connection is usually active when you plug in USB, but that is not what you're describing here. So what else could make the MSP connection become active? Well, it turns out that there are other things than the USB plug that can use the MSP protocol to communicate with the flight controller, and maybe something in the TBS Power Cube is like, for example, I don't know, but maybe some other TBS peripheral is doing it. I asked Emmerich to send me a photo of his ports tab, And sure enough, we can see that there are no other MSP ports active. MSP is only active on the USB plug. So this shows there's no way that MSP can be becoming active in flight unless you have plugged in USB. Hi, Emmerich. Because the MSP protocol is only enabled for the USB VCP port, only plugging it in USB can cause the MSP flag to become active and prevent arming. I guess I'm not 100% sure. I can't see any way. If there's a way, I don't know. It's really surprised me. If you plug in USB, then unplug it, MSP will stay active until you power cycle the quad. So just power cycle the quad after you unplug USB. There should not be any way for MSP to become active after power up except to plug in the USB port. Maxime Gagnon asks, since I started flying FPV, I've never been able to tune a quad. I don't know why, but even if I kept listening to your PID tuning videos, nothing seems to click in my head. The thing is, I can't feel what you're feeling when you tune your quad. I always just flew a quad with default PIDs. Can you help me out? And what I say in response, that's a tough one. The default PIDs are very good for most pilots. In fact, they're better than they ever have been, and they just keep getting better. I even took one of my quadcopters. It was on default PIDs, and I said, I'm going to do some PID tuning on this. And I uploaded the black box log to the Black Box Log Analysis Facebook group, and they said, it looks really good. So I was like, okay, I guess I don't need to tune it. If you're happy flying the quad and you don't notice any deficiencies, just keep flying it and don't worry too much about tuning. There's this sense that, oh, but what if it could be better? And maybe there's some truth to that. But the truth is, if you can fly the quad and you're doing what you want to do, then you don't need to focus on the PID tuning. But there is some truth to the idea that maybe it could be better and you don't know what you're missing. Maybe you think you're a bad pilot, but if the quad was tuned better, then you would. So there is some validity to like getting someone else to look at your tune or fly your quad, or you to fly somebody else's quad, but that's not going to be something we can do over the internet. If you do want to get better at tuning, you have to learn to recognize the deficiencies in the tune and then figure out how to fix them. The most obvious thing to fix is prop wash oscillation, and here's a video about how to improve it. This is my video right here, Betaflight 4.1 RPM filter settings, best settings to kill prop wash, and that really does help with the prop wash oscillation. Here's a question from a fella who wants to know how to get sponsored, and I kind of half think he's joking, but it is a very common question. The best way to get sponsored is to pick a vendor and or product that you really like and believe in, then start making content about it. Make tutorials, make a review, be honest and sincere and positive, be helpful. Get onto the vendor's Facebook group or forum or whatever and answer questions. Be polite, be correct. Giving wrong answers isn't helpful. Just be visible, and eventually somebody will notice and start sending you free stuff. That's how to do it. This question is from Jonathan Lawrence, and he did the USB-C internal charging upgrade on his Jumper T16, and it's not working. He's plugged it in, and the little red charging LED turns on, but the battery doesn't actually charge up. So either the USB charging board is damaged, in which case ask for a replacement. Shouldn't have to. That's just a warranty issue. Or your wiring is incorrect, in which case be careful, because, batteries don't like to be messed with, but double check the wiring. Jonathan was also having problems with his Jumper T16 with stuck keys and the ribbon cables, needed to reseat the ribbon cables. My impression is that the batch of T16 radios that went out just before Chinese New Year had a lot of problems with the ribbon cables, needing to be reseated, flipped over. I think those guys were in a hurry to go on vacation or something. It sucks. If you bought a Jumper T16 in the December, January, February timeframe, it sucks. The ribbon cables are just a complete mess. Jumper needs to do better. Bobster has a Larva X with Crossfire receiver, and it stopped sending battery voltage back. When I do a Discover sensors, no battery voltage shows up. Voltage is showing up in the Betaflight OSD which confirms that the flight controller has VBAT, but he's not getting telemetry. The first thing I would want to check is whether Crossfire telemetry is working at all. Was it working in the past? If you go to the T16 telemetry screen and delete all sensors, then discover new sensors, do you see RxBat and the other sensors come in, or only the receiver-based sensors like RSSI? If you only see the receiver-based sensors, then that means telemetry isn't working. If it was working before, then a wire may have gotten damaged. If it has never been working, then it could be a configuration issue. Normally, if you have Crossfire control, then you also have telemetry. But like, check in the configuration tab whether the telemetry feature is turned on. Let's find out. The biggest question is whether it was working and now it's stopped, or if it never was working. That's the thing we got to figure out the most. Remy asks, I have a problem with my quad. The quad flies perfectly until I do stalls like the one over the tree. Then it wobbles a bit every time I release the throttle. Maybe the min throttle is too low. That's a good guess, Remy. Let's take a look at your video. I'm going to need audio for this. Whenever you're analyzing a tune or a troubleshoot, it's very important to hear the motors if at all possible. Makes a big difference. I mean, there's not a lot to complain about here. This is pretty damn good. Maybe the OneDrive mangling the compression is a little wobble there, I guess. Not much, dude. Not much. Is he talking about the split S? I really don't see anything in that split S. Hi, Remy. You could try raising the idle percent, and I do think it would give a little more stability at low throttle. Yeah, you can also try disabling dmin if you are using Betaflight 4.1. Dmin can add a little instability like that, although it usually happens at cruise, not at zero throttle. Are you using dynamic idle? I recently started playing with it and noticed the same thing. Here's a question from Richard who is trying to bind his FlySky receiver. He's got the receiver in binding mode, but then he turns on the FlySky, its light becomes solid, but there's no binding. I'm not actually sure I'm following this, especially because it's been a little while since I bound a FlySky, so I don't have like the exact sequence of lights like burned into my brain. But he said he turns on the FlySky. I'm not. Is he actually initiating binding in the FlySky? You got to actually like put the FlySky into bind mode. Maybe I'm missing something there. He also says his Rush Tank Ultimate Mini gets hot real fast. That's completely normal. Video transmitters get super hot because they are designed to operate in airflow from the props. So without airflow, they get super hot. But as long as you got an antenna connected, no harm done. Avril Dalton has a few questions about the DJI Air unit. The first question is, what is the maximum bit rate? I believe it's about 25 megabits per second. Is it normal to have focus mode kick in right after taking off in low latency mode? I don't fly in focus mode, so I couldn't really tell you. I definitely don't fly in autofocus mode because I don't want that. I just want my picture to be what it is. I don't want it like changing while I'm flying as much as possible. I wouldn't think that's normal, though. Focus mode shouldn't, if you're in auto, I don't think it should kick in, especially if you're at 25 megabits per second. Avril, I think you've been talking about this elsewhere, like on my Discord server or maybe in Facebook Messenger. We've been talking about this. You've got a Vista, and I think you may have a problem with your Vista because that doesn't sound normal to me. Have you tried the analog adapter board, which connects to the side of the goggles? Yep, it's great. It's wonderful. You should totally do it if you're interested in using analog with your DJI goggles. The only downside is that there's nothing holding the module in to the board. You'd have to find some way to make sure it didn't just like fall out. But other than that, it's great. Standoffs are structural. Never 3D print structural. Like, they would just break. They'll just break. Are you kidding me? There's no way that they won't just break. There's no. Oh, he doesn't mean standoffs. He means like spacers. Okay, that's different. That's clever. No, that's clever. Hi, Lucas. I believe the max bitrate for the DJI system is about 25 megabits per second. Your experience with focus mode doesn't seem normal to me, but to be honest, I don't fly in focus mode, so I can't be 100% sure. The only real downside I can see of the analog adapter is that nothing's holding the module into the adapter, so I would worry that the module could fall out. But with a 3D printer, I know you could solve that problem. Those 3D printed spacers are pretty cool. Here's a question from Dan, and it is the single most popular question that I get in the world. My receiver is not working. So what I always do is I ask to see the receiver and the flight controller and try to see how they're wired up. Let's assume that the yellow, where do they go on the flight controller? Let's assume that the yellow one is signal. So let's look. Thankfully, I very much appreciate he sent a pinout diagram. Now, where on the yellow is going to TX1, white is going to RX1. What receiver is it? That would only be right if this was a Crossfire receiver, because only Crossfire goes to TX and RX. What receiver? Because it's going to TX1 and RX1. These DYS flight controllers, I don't know if this is still true, but there was a bug on like UART 2 or 3. Like, which one was it? It was this one over here. TX and RX were swapped. So TX was actually RX and RX was actually TX. And I would bet you a large amount of money they still to this day have not fixed that, because they didn't fix it for a year. We were still dealing with that. Just a random piece of information that I happen to know. Rotorite used them for a while, and X-Hover used them, and such a pain in the ass. I mean, once you knew, but you got so many questions and calls about people trying to use UART3 and it didn't work. If he's using RX1 and TX1 both to his receiver, the only possibility is that that has to be Crossfire, otherwise that wouldn't be correct. He would need to be using RX1 only. So let's see what receiver he's using. Here's a question from Andy Lamani, another really common, really popular question. The question is, when I arm the quad and run the throttle up to full, I don't see all four of the motors go up to 2,000. One doesn't. Two get close. Is that normal? Yes, that's completely normal, because the PID controller is trying to make the quad fly. When you raise the throttle to max, you're not just saying turn all the motors to max, because if that were true, then like you couldn't actually fly the quad. It would just turn all the motors to max and it would just go off into the distance. So it's completely normal, especially when props are off, that when you raise the throttle, the motors will do weird things. Imagine if you were driving a car and you turned the steering wheel and the car didn't turn left, and you turn the steering wheel and it doesn't turn right. You would like jerk the steering wheel around like crazily trying to get the car to drive. And you would probably end up just like yanking the wheel all the way over one direction, hoping it would work. And that's what the flight controller is doing when you raise the throttle with the props off. It's just trying to fly the quad and failing because there are no props. So that's normal. Andy also says his battery's drained from full charge in like 5 minutes tops. That seems pretty generous, my friend. So I don't know. 5 minutes flight time. That seems about right. Hi, Andy. It's totally normal that if you arm the quad with props off and raise the throttle, the motors won't all go to 2,000. The flight controller is trying to fly the quad, so the motors don't just go to a fixed value. What you're seeing is normal. 5 minutes of flying from a 13 1300 milliamp hour pack seems pretty generous to me. I usually get closer to 2.5 minutes, depending on how hard I'm flying. Got a question here from Lucas, who wants to know where to connect this wire. And I agree, Lucas, this is pretty confusing because the camera isn't labeled. The camera goes, voltage input, ground, video, and here's the two wires for the joystick, but there's no label for this blue wire. My money says that blue wire is the V-Sense wire. I'll tell you what that is in just a second. But let's look up the RunCam Phoenix 2 and see if we can find a pinout to verify that. Ah, it's not labeled. No, oh. Okay, whoa, it doesn't have a pin. Okay, that did not expect that. I'm glad I looked that up. So that would be the V-Sense wire if this was a different camera, but this one isn't. Does this one not have a built-in OSD? Is that possible that it doesn't have an OSD? Well, I guess it's possible. That wire is used on cameras that have a built-in OSD that can show voltage. The wire is used to sense voltage for the OSD. The Phoenix doesn't have such a feature, so the wire has no function. And in fact, if you look at the pins in the plug, in the jack, you'll see there is no pin to go with that wire position. This fella asks whether we can combine the 5 volt and the 3.3 volt outputs on a flight controller to get 8.3 volts. I have actually, that's not as dumb a question as it sounds like. The CL Racing flight controller, I am 99% sure, but you should double check this before you do it. I'm 99% sure that Chen Ling said that you can combine 5 volts and 3.3 volts to get 8 volts and run, I guess the DJI Air unit. I don't know. You should double check that before you do it, because normally if you connect 2 voltage regulators together, the higher voltage one will feed current into the lower voltage one and fry it, I think. So don't do that unless you're 100% sure it would work. What would you suggest for a beginner that wants to get a complete setup for around $200? Emacs Tiny Hawk Ready to Fly kit. It's not perfect. It's not perfect, but it's got everything you need to get started for about $160 plus shipping. And you can figure out if FPV is something you really want to get into. Yeah, that's what I go with. Here's a question from Devin Linares, who is having trouble binding his FreeSky receiver to his QX7S. He flashed to the latest firmware, and now it won't bind. Well, that's the problem. The latest FreeSky firmware is not backwards compatible with previous versions. I got a video about that. It's linked here. And it may be the case that you can either update the firmware on your QX7 to 2.x, or you can roll your firmware back on your FreeSky receiver to pre-2.x. Most people who are using the older firmware are not experiencing the bug that caused them to release the 2.x update. The bug is pretty serious. The channels can just lock out, and you just have a flyaway. So it's a pretty big deal, but most people aren't experiencing that bug. And if you're not experiencing that bug, I mean, I guess you never know. But personally, I don't run 2.x on any of my FreeSky receivers because of this compatibility issue. All right, we're back to April 2nd. And see, I'm sure there's questions in here, but like, so-and-so mentioned you, reacted to you, reacted, mentioned, replied. So there's a reply to a story, but it's, there's no way to, like, freaking mark as read either, is there? There's no way. Or mark as done. I have to individually, every one of these, mark them as done. That's not going to happen. Move to done. Give me a break. I have 5,000 messages here. How am I going to mark each one of them as done? Are you freaking kidding me? See, look, here's a guy from freaking March 28th who wanted me to help. But look, it all got lost in this garbage. Instagram. Can you please distinguish actual messages from people from this bull replied to your story? Okay, so this is actually a response. We're back to March 28th. I'm really sorry. I'm not going to I can't freaking troubleshoot this problem through Instagram because it's going to require a ton of back and forth. And Instagram is horrible. I'm so annoyed that there's people trying to contact me and I'm not they think I'm ignoring them. I don't do that. I crashed my drone and the magnets from one motor spilled out. I Loctited them back in. Now the motor is heating up. It's heating up probably because it's off balance. Is the magnet orientation wrong? I don't think so. Those magnets wouldn't let you put them in with incorrect polarization. They would just push against each other and snap out, or I don't know. But I don't know. Right? Could you? I don't know. Just replace the motor, dude. It's off balance. That's what I think. Woohoo! I fixed Richard's problem. I don't know. He said he tried it. You know what happened? I know why it worked, Richard. Because you followed the actual steps and there was some step in here that you weren't doing. That's why I write the steps down very, very carefully and very specifically to give you the exact things to do. It's very easy to leave out a step or miss something. I'm so glad it worked. Yes. Alrighty, guys. Well, I got more to do here on Discord, but Discord doesn't... Can you zoom in? No, Discord you can't really zoom in on too easily. So we're going to call this a night. I got a little bit more to do, and then it'll be bedtime, and back at it in the morning. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Happy flying.